At my promotion dinner, my mom ignored my achievement and said, "We should really be throwing a party for Lily's big news." When I told her I was sick of being second place, she rolled her eyes and said, "You're jealous of your own cousin. That's pathetic." I just walked away. That was last month. Yesterday, I learned she's planning to sign my late father's house over to Lily. I have known my whole life that my mom favors my cousin Lily over me. My mom's sister passed away when Lily was 7. After that, my mom stepped in as her second mother. I understood at first. Lily went through a lot, losing her mom so young. But over time, it became very clear that my mom didn't just help Lily. She treated her like the golden child, while I was the afterthought. When we were kids, birthdays were the most obvious. My mom would give me a t-shirt or a book. Lily would get the newest phone, designer clothes, or expensive jewelry because she's been through so much. If I said anything, my mom would snap, "Don't be selfish. She doesn't have a mother to spoil her like you do." It never mattered that she was my mom too. At home, I had strict rules. My curfew was 9 p.m. until I was 18. I had to do dishes, clean the yard, and watch my little cousins. Lily, she could sleep over at friends' houses for days without checking in, never did chores, and if she made a mess in our kitchen, my mom would tell me to clean it because Lily is a guest. She's been a guest for 17 years. When I went to college, I had to take out loans and work part-time. My mom said she couldn't afford to help, but when Lily decided to go to an expensive private school for fashion, my mom paid her tuition in full and even covered her rent. When I asked why, she said, "Lily's mother would have wanted me to step in. You're a man, you'll figure it out." That line still makes my blood boil. 2 years ago, my old car died. I asked my mom if she could help me buy a used one so I could get to work. She said she didn't have the money. A month later, she surprised Lily with a brand new car because she deserved something nice for all her hard work. At that point, Lily wasn't even working. She was posting Instagram photos and building her brand. Family holidays always turned into Lily's show. My mom would decorate the tree with ornaments Lily picked out. She'd cook Lily's favorite dishes even if I hated them. If Lily couldn't make it home for Christmas, my mom would postpone the celebration until she could. But if I missed a holiday because of work, she'd say, "Well, life goes on." The breaking point, my promotion party. Last month, I got a big promotion at work. I was so proud of myself. I've been busting my ass for years. I invited my mom, some relatives, and Lily to dinner to celebrate. During the dinner, my mom barely congratulated me. Instead, she kept going on about how Lily had just gotten a collaboration with a clothing brand and how she might be moving to Los Angeles soon. Then, when the cake came out, my mom actually said, "Well, this is nice, but we should really be throwing a party for Lily's big news." Everyone laughed awkwardly. I just sat there, stunned. It was my celebration, and my mom literally turned it into a pre-party for Lily. After dinner, I pulled my mom aside and told her it hurt that she always put Lily above me. She gave me the usual gaslighting. "Stop being dramatic. I love you both equally." I told her it's always about Lily and I'm sick of it. She rolled her eyes and said, "You're jealous of your own cousin. That's pathetic." That night, I went home furious. I started thinking about every time my mom made me feel like I was second place in my own family, and I decided I was done playing nice. The next week, my mom called me to say she was hosting a big going away party for Lily's move to LA, and she wanted me to help pay for it. I laughed. Then I said, "Absolutely not. In fact, I won't even be there." She was shocked. "What do you mean? This is family." I told her, "Family isn't one-sided. I've been treated like an afterthought for years while you hand Lily everything. You paid for her school, her rent, her car, her parties, and I was just the kid you told to figure it out. Well, I have figured it out. I don't need to be part of this anymore." She tried the guilt trip. "Your aunt would be heartbroken if she saw how you're treating Lily." I said, "My aunt isn't here, and if she were, I think she'd be heartbroken at how you've treated your own son." Then I hung up. Apparently, without me there to help organize and pay for things, the event was a mess. The caterer messed up, the DJ canceled last minute, and half the guests left early. Even better, a few relatives noticed my absence and started asking my mom why I wasn't there. My mom tried to make it sound like I was being petty, but Lily herself ended up blurting out that my mom obviously loves her more. She said it like it was a joke, but apparently, the room went silent. Now, some relatives are telling my mom they see exactly what I was talking about. My mom is upset because people are taking your side and says I've embarrassed her. I told her, "No, you embarrassed yourself. I just stopped covering for you." Since then, I've gone low contact. I don't answer every call, and I keep our conversations short. But just when I thought I could finally put some distance between us, I found out my mom has been planning to sign the house over to Lily, even though it was my late father's inheritance to me. I found out through my cousin Jake, who works at a title company, and saw my mom's name pop up in their system last week. My hands were shaking as I drove straight to David's apartment at 11 that night with screenshots Jake had sent me showing my mom's text to Lily about transferring the house. David opened his door in boxers and immediately knew something was wrong from my face. I shoved my phone at him and paced his living room while he pulled up property records on his laptop. The house was in a trust my dad set up before he died, with me as the sole beneficiary when I turned 30, which is only 18 months away. David found the original trust documents online and printed everything while I explained how my dad specifically wanted me to have the family home. The next morning I drove to the county records office the second they opened. The clerk, an older woman with glasses on a chain, pulled the files I requested and mentioned someone else had requested these exact same documents yesterday. She described a woman in her 50s with short brown hair, definitely my mom. I sat in my car in the parking lot reading through my father's will for the first time since I was 16. The language was crystal clear about the house transferring to me on my 30th birthday with no exceptions or conditions. My hand shook as I took photos of every single page with my phone. I drove straight to my mom's workplace and caught her in the parking lot during her lunch break. She rolled her eyes when she saw me coming and tried to get in her car, but I blocked the door. I told her I knew about her trying to transfer the house to Lily. She said Lily needs stability for her brand and I was being selfish again. When I mentioned Dad's will, she claimed he would have wanted the family to share everything. Her coworkers were staring through the office windows as our voices got louder. She finally pushed past me and drove off without another word. David texted me an hour later with news that made my stomach drop. There had been activity on the property's title insurance with someone initiating a title review 3 weeks ago. I realized my mom had been planning this since before my promotion dinner, maybe even longer. That evening I went through boxes of old family photos in my apartment storage unit. I found pictures of my dad teaching me to ride my bike in the driveway of that house. Behind one photo was a handwritten note from him that said this will always be your home. Son, dated just 2 months before he died. Rachel called me while I was still going through the photos because our mom had complained to her about my tantrum at her work. Rachel started off skeptical, saying I needed to let things go, but her tone changed completely when I explained about the house and Dad's will. She went quiet for a long moment, then admitted she'd noticed our mom had opened new credit cards in both our names last year for emergencies. I was scrolling through Instagram later that night when Lily's story popped up. She was was giving a tour of what she called her future studio space, which was my father's workshop in our basement. She was measuring walls and talking to her 50,000 followers about renovation plans and where she'd put her photography equipment. The comments were full of people congratulating her on finally having her own place. David came over the next morning with paperwork for an emergency injunction to prevent any property transfers. The judge scheduled a hearing in 2 weeks, but I would have to serve my mom with the papers myself. David warned me this would escalate everything, but we both knew I had no choice. I met Rachel for coffee that afternoon at a place near her office. She looked exhausted and told me she'd been up all night going through old bank statements. She discovered our mom had been paying Lily's rent for 3 years using money from our father's life insurance, money that was specifically meant for both our educations. Rachel never got her portion and had to take out massive student loans while watching Lily live rent-free in a luxury apartment downtown. The next Sunday, I was sitting at home when Rachel texted me that mom was having her usual family dinner at the house. 20 minutes later, she sent another text saying some guy in a suit just walked up to the door during dessert. The process server handed mom the legal papers right there in front of everyone, including our cousins from Cleveland who were visiting. Mom's face went white as she read through the documents while everyone watched in silence. Lily jumped up from her chair and started sobbing, pointing at the papers and yelling that I was trying to make her homeless. Our Uncle Tom immediately started shaking his head at the whole situation while our Aunt Karen rubbed mom's back. Most of the family started muttering about how family should help family and how I was being cruel to both of them. Rachel told me later that mom spent the rest of dinner crying while Lily posted Instagram stories about being attacked by her own family. 2 days after that, I heard a knock at my apartment door around 9 at night. Frank was standing there in his work clothes, looking tired and asking if he could come in for a minute. He sat on my couch and pulled out his phone to show me screenshots of text messages between him and mom. The messages were from 2 months ago where mom promised Lily the house in writing once everything was sorted out. Frank then showed me bank statements where Lily had transferred $30,000 to mom for future renovations on the property. He said Lily got that money from her brand sponsorships and thought she was investing in her future home. Frank looked defeated as he explained that Lily had already picked out paint colors and furniture for every room. He left after 10 minutes, saying he just wanted me to know what I was dealing with. 3 days later at work, I kept making mistakes on the quarterly financial reports I was preparing. I entered the wrong numbers in 3 different spreadsheets and missed an important deadline for submitting expense accounts. My supervisor called me into her office after lunch and pointed out all the errors I'd been making lately. She suggested I take some personal time to deal with whatever was going on in my life. I realized this whole mess with mom and Lily was affecting every part of my daily routine. That afternoon, my phone rang while I was packing up my desk to leave early. Gloria, mom's younger sister, was calling from Phoenix where she'd moved 5 years ago. She'd heard about the lawsuit from another relative and wanted to know if the stories were true. When I explained everything, she got quiet for a moment before telling me something I never knew. When their mother died 15 years ago, mom had tried to claim jewelry and china that were specifically left to Gloria. Gloria had to get a lawyer involved just to get what was rightfully hers from the will. She offered to write a statement or testify if I needed her support in court. The next Monday, I was reviewing budget spreadsheets at my desk when the receptionist called saying I had visitors. I walked to the lobby to find Lily standing there with 2 guys holding camera equipment and lights. She announced loudly that she was filming a day in the life segment about her successful cousin for her YouTube channel. I told her to leave, but she kept talking to the camera about how I worked in finance. The security guard had already called building management when she started trying to push past me toward the elevators. She kept filming even as 2 security officers arrived and asked her to leave the premises immediately. When she refused and tried to set up her tripod in the lobby, they physically escorted her out. The whole scene lasted maybe 15 minutes, but everyone on my floor saw or heard about it. My coworkers kept giving me weird looks for the rest of the day and whispering when I walked by. That Thursday evening, I drove to the house after work to grab some tools I'd left in the garage. My key wouldn't turn in the lock, and that's when I noticed the locks had been changed completely. All my stuff was sitting in cardboard boxes on the front porch getting soaked by the rain that had started. A note taped to one box said, "Until you apologize," to Lily in mom's handwriting. I loaded everything into my car while the rain poured down, making multiple trips for all the boxes. Some of my dad's old books were ruined from the water damage and his vintage record collection was warped. I sat in my car for a minute, looking at the house where I grew up and paid rent for 3 years. A week later, David called me during his lunch break with news that made my stomach drop. He'd been doing research at the courthouse and found paperwork mom had filed claiming I was mentally unstable. The documents alleged I had jealousy issues and anger problems that made me unfit to inherit property. Mom was building a case to challenge dad's will based on my supposed mental health issues. David scanned and emailed me copies of everything, including statements from 2 of mom's friends claiming they'd witnessed my unstable behavior. That same afternoon, Rachel called and offered me her spare room since I was basically living out of boxes anyway. While unpacking at her place that weekend, I found a manila folder at the bottom of one box. Inside were letters dad had written to someone named Thomas Brennan about setting up the house trust. The letterhead showed Brennan was an estate attorney with an office downtown on High Street. Dad's letters mentioned making video recordings and keeping duplicate documents in case anyone challenged his wishes. I realized Brennan might still have copies of everything we needed to prove mom couldn't legally give away the house. I called Brennan's office Monday morning and his secretary scheduled me for that Wednesday afternoon. Walking into his office, I recognized him immediately from dad's funeral 12 years ago. He remembered me too and listened carefully as I explained what mom was trying to do with the house. His face got more serious with each detail, especially when I mentioned the $30,000 from Lily. He stood up and walked to his filing cabinet, pulling out a thick folder with dad's name on it. Inside was the original trust paperwork, all properly notarized and witnessed by 3 different people. Then he opened his desk drawer and pulled out a DVD labeled with dad's name and the date. He explained it was standard practice in contested estate cases to record video testimonies of the person's wishes. We watched part of it right there, dad sitting in that same office chair explaining why he wanted the house to go to me. Brennan made copies of everything and said the trust was completely ironclad regardless of what mom claimed about my mental state. 2 weeks later, we all sat in a courtroom for the preliminary hearing about the house situation. Mom's lawyer spent 20 minutes arguing that I was vindictive and unstable, bringing up the restaurant incident from months ago. He claimed I was harassing poor Lily who had invested her savings into the property in good faith. The judge listened to both sides, reviewed the trust documents, and then ordered a 2-week cooling off period. She strongly suggested both parties try mediation before moving forward with a full trial that would cost everyone time and money. That night David drove me to his place and we sat on his couch while I stared at the ceiling trying to process everything. He brought me a beer and sat down next to me. After a long silence he told me his parents cut him off completely when he came out at 22. He said they called him disgusting and told him he Tammy was dead to them. He hadn't spoken to them in 7 years. He looked at me and said he understood what it felt like when your own family turns on you. Then he promised he'd fight this case pro bono if needed because nobody should lose their home to manipulation. I nodded and took another sip of beer while he pulled out his laptop to start working on our strategy. 2 weeks passed slowly with David filing motions and gathering more evidence. The mediation date arrived and we walked into a conference room where my mom sat with her lawyer looking confident. The mediator was an older woman who seemed tired before we even started. My mom's lawyer proposed what they called a reasonable compromise where I could have the house when I turned 35, which would give Lily 5 more years to establish her fashion career. The mediator actually started nodding like this made sense. I watched David pull out his phone and connect it to the conference room TV. My dad's face appeared on screen in a video from 12 years ago. He was sitting at his desk talking directly to the camera saying he knew Diane might try to take the house someday and that's why he put it in an ironclad trust for me. The mediator's face changed completely as she watched. My mom stood up and stormed out without saying anything. That same night Lily posted a TikTok with tears streaming down her face claiming I was suing my own mother to make her homeless even though she was an orphan. She tagged it with every viral hashtag she could think of. Within 24 hours it had 2 million views and my phone started blowing up with notifications. People I'd never met were sending me death threats calling me heartless and selfish. Someone found my LinkedIn and posted screenshots everywhere. My Instagram got flooded with comments saying I should die. Rachel called me the next morning crying because mom had been calling all our relatives telling them I was gay and being controlled by my lawyer boyfriend. She said mom was telling everyone David had brainwashed me into turning against family. Our aunt from Florida called Rachel asking if it was true that I'd joined some kind of cult. Our cousin from Texas posted on Facebook that homosexuality was destroying families. Rachel said she tried to defend me but mom kept twisting everything. I sat there listening while scrolling through hundreds of hate messages on every platform I had. My hands were shaking as I deleted my Facebook account first, then Instagram, then Twitter, then LinkedIn. I turned off my phone and sat alone in Rachel's spare room where I'd been staying. The walls felt like they were closing in and I wondered if a house was worth losing everything. Gloria called Rachel's landline that evening and asked to speak to me. She said she'd been cleaning out her attic and found something I needed to see. She emailed me scanned bank statements from 15 years ago showing my mom had borrowed $45,000 from Gloria's mother before she died. The dates matched exactly when mom started paying for Lily's private school and designer clothes. Gloria said mom never paid back a cent and actually asked for more money at the funeral. I stared at those statements realizing this went back way further than I ever knew. The next morning my boss called me into his office looking uncomfortable. Someone had sent HR an anonymous complaint with screenshots of Lily's videos and links to all the comments calling me unstable and dangerous. They said they needed to place me on administrative leave while they investigated whether I posed a risk to the workplace. I packed up my desk while my coworkers watched and whispered. Security walked me out like I was some kind of criminal. Thomas showed up at Rachel's apartment that afternoon carrying a box of old documents. He said my dad had given these to him 12 years ago with specific instructions. Inside were letters my dad wrote predicting exactly this situation and additional trust documents with multiple fail-safes he'd built in. Thomas said my dad knew my mom's patterns and planned for every possible move she might make. 3 days later David called me sounding shocked. He'd been investigating the house situation when he discovered something else. My mom had opened 3 credit cards in my name totaling $15,000 in debt. They were all maxed out with charges for Lily's business expenses including photography equipment and plane tickets to fashion shows. The applications used my social security number with forged signatures. David said this was identity theft and fraud which meant criminal charges. That evening Rachel came home with a box she'd found in mom's garage. We sat on her living room floor going through dad's old files and found receipts from 2 different times he'd paid off mom's gambling debts. One was for $20,000 from a casino in Atlantic City. Another was for $30,000 from online poker sites. Both receipts had notes in dad's handwriting saying mom promised to get help. Rachel was about to say something when my phone started ringing and Frank's name showed up on the screen. His voice was shaking when I answered and he kept saying he'd messed up bad. He told me mom had gotten him to co-sign some papers for Lily's new business venture and he just found out from the bank that they'd used my dad's house as collateral for a $100,000 loan. The house that mom didn't even own. Frank said he'd been stupid and trusted mom when she said it was all legal and now the bank was calling about missed payments. He wanted to meet right away to give me copies of everything. The next morning I went straight to the police station with all the documents David had helped me gather plus the new loan papers from Frank. The detective who took my report was a woman in her 40s who kept shaking her head as she read through everything. She said family cases like this rarely went anywhere because prosecutors didn't want to deal with them but the fake loan using property mom didn't own was serious fraud. She suggested I keep gathering evidence of a pattern going back years. That same night around 2 in the morning Rachel called me and said Lily was at her apartment crying and wanting to talk. Rachel had her phone recording in her pocket when she let Lily in. Lily sat on Rachel's couch sobbing about how everything was falling apart and then she said something that made my blood run cold. She admitted she knew about the house situation all along and thought she deserved it more than me because at least I had a father growing up while she lost her mom. Rachel kept the recording going while Lily talked about how mom had promised her the house since she was 12 and how it wasn't fair that I got everything just because I was blood related. A week later David filed more papers with the court including the fraud charges and all the identity theft documentation we'd collected. The judge's assistant called that afternoon saying they were expediting the hearing because of the criminal elements involved. Mom must have found out about the expedited hearing because the next day my boss called me into his office looking confused and uncomfortable. He said mom had called the company directly claiming I was embezzling money to fund my lawsuit against her. Even though it was obviously crazy they had to open a formal investigation which meant I was suspended with pay until it was resolved. I was walking out of the building carrying my box of desk stuff when 3 of my coworkers caught up with me in the parking lot. They said they'd already gone to HR to support me because they'd all seen what happened when Lily showed up at the office that time. One of them pulled out his phone and showed me a video he'd taken of Lily in the lobby admitting she came to pressure me into dropping everything. The forensic accountant David recommended met with me 2 days later at a small office downtown. We spent 4 hours going through bank records and found something that made David whistle when I called him. Mom had been taking money from the maintenance account Dad set up for the house and moving it to her personal accounts for 6 years. The total was almost $80,000 that was supposed to go to property taxes and repairs. At the expedited hearing 3 days later mom's lawyer tried to make me look vindictive and greedy but Thomas's testimony about the trust was devastating. He brought the original documents showing Dad's clear intent and the video evidence from my coworker's phone played on the courtroom screen showing Lily admitting to trying to pressure me. The judge looked angry as she ordered mom to cease all actions regarding the property immediately immediately and said any violation would result in immediate arrest. Frank asked to meet me for lunch the day after the hearing at a quiet diner near his work. He pulled out his phone and showed me text messages going back 8 years where Mom kept telling Lily the house would be hers someday. Some of the messages talked about how I didn't deserve it and how Lily was the real daughter Mom wished she'd had. Frank said he'd been blind to it all, but seeing those messages made him realize Mom had been planning this for years. 2 weeks passed before the detective called me back and said they were opening a formal investigation into the identity theft and fraud. Mom would have to come in for questioning under caution, which meant they were considering criminal charges. Part of me felt sick thinking about my own mother possibly going to jail, but then I remembered all those years of being treated like I didn't matter in my own family. 3 days later I walked back into my office building for the first time in weeks, and the security guard at the front desk actually stood up and shook my hand. Word had gotten around about what happened with my mom showing up and making threats, and apparently HR had sent out an email clearing me of any wrongdoing. My coworkers kept stopping by my desk all morning with coffee and donuts and telling me they'd been following everything on social media since Lily's videos went viral. My supervisor called me into his office around lunch and told me the company was promoting me to senior analyst effective immediately because of how professionally I'd handled the whole situation without letting it affect my work quality. That same afternoon Rachel called me crying because she'd gone to visit Dad's grave and found paperwork from the cemetery office stuffed in the mailbox saying someone had tried to transfer ownership of his unused burial plot next to him. The cemetery confirmed that Mom had come in last week with fake documents trying to sell the plot that was supposed to be mine someday, but they'd refused when she couldn't prove she had authority over the estate. I drove straight to the cemetery after work and sat there in front of Dad's headstone for 2 hours just talking to him about everything that had happened since he died 12 years ago. I told him about the house and the credit cards and how Mom was trying to give away everything he'd left for me, and I completely broke down sobbing harder than I had since his funeral. The groundskeeper saw me and brought over some tissues and sat with me for a while and told me his own story about family fighting over inheritance after his mother died. Gloria called me that night and said she'd organized a meeting with 7 other relatives at her house, and everyone finally admitted they'd seen Mom's favoritism for years but kept quiet to avoid drama. They all agreed to write statements supporting my legal case, and 2 of them even had photos and videos from family events showing the obvious difference in how Mom treated me versus Lily. Meanwhile, Lily's Instagram was imploding as brand after brand dropped their partnerships with her once news of the fraud investigation spread through influencer gossip channels. She posted these desperate videos crying and saying I was ruining her life and that she'd hurt herself if she lost the house, and her followers were turning on her in the comments calling her a scammer. A week passed and the bank called to tell me they'd frozen all the fraudulent credit cards and were launching a full investigation that could result in federal mail fraud charges against Mom. The investigator warned me that Mom could face serious prison time if convicted, but said I wouldn't be held responsible for any of the charges she'd racked up in my name. I started seeing a therapist the next week because I couldn't sleep and kept having panic attacks about everything, and she helped me understand that Mom's behavior patterns pointed to untreated gambling addiction and possibly narcissistic personality disorder. She explained how Mom had probably been using me as a financial resource while emotionally investing everything in Lily as her golden child fantasy, and it finally made sense why nothing I did was ever good enough. 2 days into therapy, Mom and Lily showed up at my workplace screaming in the lobby about how I was destroying the family, and security had to physically drag them out while my coworkers watched in shock. My company's legal department immediately filed for a restraining order on my behalf and banned them from the property and told me they'd prosecute if either of them came back. David had been digging through public records and discovered that Mom had tried to refinance Dad's house 3 different times over the past 2 years but kept getting denied because her name wasn't on the deed or the trust documents. The loan application showed clear intent to defraud since she listed herself as the sole owner each time and forged my signature on the paperwork, which the banks caught during their verification process. Frank called me that night and said he was moving out of the house and separating from Mom because he couldn't handle the lies anymore after finding out about everything she'd hidden from him. He apologized for not seeing what was happening all these years and said he'd testify about Mom's manipulation and financial schemes if my case went to court. 3 days later the prosecutor called me and said Mom had been offered a deal where she could avoid prison if she paid back everything she stole and agreed to never contact me or come near the house again. She had 72 hours to decide, and the prosecutor said most people in her position would jump at this chance to avoid jail time. I was sitting at my desk when my phone started blowing up with notifications from Instagram, and my cousin Sarah was calling me over and over. I answered and she was screaming that Lily was live streaming herself taking a bunch of pills and saying goodbye to her followers. I called 911 while watching the stream on my laptop and saw Lily sitting on her bathroom floor with empty pill bottles around her telling everyone this was all my fault for destroying her life. The paramedics broke down her door about 10 minutes later and I could see them working on her before the stream cut off. Mom called me an hour later screaming that I'd driven Lily to try to kill herself and she was going to make sure everyone knew what I'd done to my poor cousin. She posted on Facebook that I was a monster who'd pushed an innocent girl to suicide over money and jealousy. The hospital wouldn't let me see Lily for 2 days, but when they finally moved her to the psychiatric ward I went to visit. She looked terrible with dark circles under her eyes and her hair all tangled up. She stared at me for a long time before saying she always knew the house wasn't really hers but she felt like she deserved it anyway. She said I had everything growing up with a dad who loved me and a stable home and a real job while she had nothing but Instagram followers who didn't really care about her. I told her I was sorry things got this bad but I couldn't let Mom steal my inheritance. She nodded and said she understood, but that didn't mean she had to like it. We didn't hug or make up, but at least we weren't screaming at each other anymore. 3 days after Lily got out of the hospital, my aunts and uncles started calling to say they were sorry for not believing me about Mom's favoritism. Uncle Pete said he'd help pay back some of what Mom stole if it meant keeping her out of prison. Aunt Gloria offered to cover $10,000 and said she should have seen what was happening years ago. Even my cousin Jake, who always took Lily's side, said Mom had gone too far this time. I went to the house with a locksmith the next week to change all the locks. Walking through those rooms felt weird now, like everything was covered in bad memories. The locksmith worked on the front door while I stood in the living room where we used to have Christmas mornings and wondered if I even wanted to keep this place anymore. Rachel came over that night with a thick folder full of papers. She'd been keeping track of everything Mom did for months without telling me. She had screenshots of Mom's Facebook posts bragging about helping Lily, receipts she'd found in Mom's trash, recordings of phone calls where Mom admitted to using my credit cards, and a timeline showing exactly when each theft happened. Her nursing training made her super organized and she documented everything like she was building a medical chart. She even had copies of bank statements showing Mom moving money from the trust account to her personal accounts over the years. The prosecutor called 2 days later to tell me Mom had rejected the plea deal. deal. She'd fired her lawyer after he told her she should take it and decided to represent herself because she thought she could convince a jury she was just being a good mother. Her old lawyer called me privately to warn me that mom was completely delusional about her chances at trial. I started seeing a therapist the next week to help me deal with everything. She helped me write a victim impact statement for the trial, but I kept getting stuck on the parts about mom. I'd write about being angry then cross it out and write about being sad then cross that out too. The therapist said it was normal to have mixed feelings about someone who was supposed to love you but hurt you instead. 2 weeks later, the forensic accountant the prosecutor hired finished going through all the financial records. He found that mom had stolen over $200,000 through different schemes over 15 years. The worst part was that the pattern started before dad even died, which meant she'd been planning this for years. David came over for dinner that night and we sat on my couch eating Chinese takeout while I told him about the accountant's report. He put his hand on mine and said he'd been wanting to tell me something for a while. He said he'd developed feelings for me that went beyond friendship, but he didn't want to complicate things while the legal stuff was still happening. I squeezed his hand and told him we could talk about it after the trial was over. 3 weeks later, I got the notice that pretrial hearings were starting and my mom had decided to represent herself instead of getting a lawyer. I showed up at the courthouse early and saw her sitting alone at the defendant's table wearing a wrinkled dress and shuffling through papers she'd printed from the internet. The prosecutor looked at me from across the room and shook her head like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. When the judge came in, my mom immediately stood up and started talking before anyone gave her permission. She went on this long rant about how she was a good mother who sacrificed everything for her children and how the court system was biased against mothers. The judge cut her off and told her to sit down and wait her turn. When it was actually time for her to speak, she accused the judge of taking bribes and said the whole case was a conspiracy against her. The judge warned her about courtroom behavior and told her if she kept making baseless accusations she'd be held in contempt. My mom kept interrupting the prosecutor and at one point actually yelled that I was an ungrateful son who was trying to steal from her. The judge had to call a recess, and when we came back my mom was warned one more outburst would result in her being removed from the courtroom. 2 days later I got a letter from Lily, who'd just left the psychiatric facility and entered an outpatient program. She wrote that she was sorry for some of what happened, but she still believed the house was promised to her when she was a kid and my mom had told her for years it would be hers. She said she was working on herself, but she still felt I'd stolen her inheritance. I threw the letter in the trash. That weekend I decided to start renovating my dad's old workshop in the garage. I needed something to do with my hands to keep from going crazy. When I pulled out his old toolbox I found a manila envelope tucked behind it with my name on it. Inside were detailed plans he'd drawn up for improvements to the workshop with notes in the margins about which projects we could do together when I got older. At the bottom of one page he'd written that he hoped I'd find peace working with my hands like he did. I spent the whole day cleaning and organizing the space. Over the next week I got calls from 3 of my mom's old friends who'd seen news about the case online. They all had similar stories about lending her money over the years that she never paid back. One woman said my mom borrowed $5,000 for Lily's sweet 16 party and promised to pay it back but never did. Another said my mom had taken $2,000 for a family emergency that turned out to be Lily wanting to go to Coachella. The third one told me my mom had convinced her to co-sign a loan that my mom defaulted on and ruined her credit. They all said they tried to stay friends with her but she'd cut them off when they asked for their money back. That Sunday Rachel and Gloria came over for dinner at my house. We grilled steaks and sat on the back porch drinking beer. It was quiet compared to the crazy family gatherings we used to have, but there was real warmth there. Gloria raised her beer and said we should toast to my dad's memory. Rachel said he would have been proud of me for standing up for myself. We sat there until it got dark just talking about normal stuff like work and movies. 3 days later I got home from work and found a thick envelope shoved under my door even though there was a restraining order. It was from my mom and filled with pages of rambling about how I was killing her and if I didn't drop the charges she would hurt herself and it would be my fault. She wrote that she'd already picked out the pills and the only thing stopping her was hoping I'd come to my senses. I immediately called the prosecutor who said this was witness intimidation and a violation of the restraining order. The next morning police arrested my mom at the motel where she'd been staying. The prosecutor called me that afternoon to say they were upgrading the charges to include elder abuse because of the money she'd stolen from my grandmother's account before she died. My mom had taken almost $30,000 in the last 2 years of my grandmother's life claiming it was for her care but using it for Lily's expenses. The potential sentence went from 3 to 5 years up to 8 to 10 years. Frank showed up at my door that evening with a box of family photos. He said he'd found them in storage and my mom had been trying to sell them online to make money. He looked tired and older than I remembered. He told me my mom had been living in her car for the past 2 weeks because she was too proud to ask anyone for help even though several people had offered. He said he'd tried to give her money but she threw it back at him and called him a traitor. He left the box and said he hoped things would get better someday. 3 days later my boss called me into his office and offered me a promotion to head of department. He said he'd been impressed with how I'd handled everything while maintaining my work performance. The raise was substantial and would mean I could finally start saving real money instead of just getting by. I accepted and felt like my professional life was finally moving forward after being stuck for so long. Over the next few weeks I started having small dinners at the house with Rachel, Gloria, and a couple of cousins who'd reached out to support me. We'd cook together and eat in the dining room that used to be off limits except for holidays. The house started feeling like mine for the first time with people who actually cared about me filling the rooms instead of people who were just there for what they could get. 3 months later, the criminal trial started at the Franklin County Courthouse downtown. I sat in the gallery with David on the first day watching them pick jurors for my mom's fraud case. The prosecutor asked each person if they could be fair when judging a mother accused of stealing from her own kids. My mom sat at the defense table wearing a black suit Rachel had bought her years ago, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. When juror number 7 said she understood how hard it was being a single parent, my mom suddenly stood up and started screaming. She yelled that the whole system was rigged against mothers who just wanted to take care of their families. The judge banged his gavel and told her to sit down but she kept going, saying I'd poisoned everyone against her. 2 bailiffs had to physically remove her from the courtroom while she screamed that they were all conspiring with me. The judge held her in contempt and ordered her to spend the night in jail before jury selection could continue. The next morning they brought her back in handcuffs and she sat there glaring at me the whole time. Once they finally got a jury seated, the prosecutor called Thomas as his first witness. Thomas brought a thick folder of documents to the stand and explained how my dad had set up the trust before he died. He told the jury my dad came to him worried about my mom's spending habits and wanted to make sure the house would go to me. Thomas pulled out a handwritten note my dad had given him saying he suspected my mom had a gambling problem. My mom's lawyer objected but the judge allowed it as evidence of my dad's intent when creating the trust. Thomas showed bank statements from 15 years ago where my mom had withdrawn thousands thousands in cash the same weeks the casino opened downtown. He explained how the trust was specifically designed to prevent her from selling or borrowing against the house. The prosecutor asked if my dad had ever mentioned why he was worried, and Thomas said yes. He testified that my dad told him my mom had already taken money from her own mother's account when she was sick. That night I couldn't sleep knowing I'd have to testify the next day. David came over and sat with me in my living room, not saying much, just being there. I kept thinking about how I was about to stand up in court and tell everyone what my own mother had done to me. My hands were shaking and I couldn't eat anything without feeling sick. David made me tea and we watched old movies until 3 in the morning when I finally dozed off on the couch. The next morning I threw up twice before heading to court. When they called my name, I walked to the witness stand on legs that felt like jelly. The prosecutor had me go through everything, starting with how my mom treated Lily different from me growing up. I talked for 3 hours about the birthday parties, the college money, the car situation, everything. My mom kept interrupting from the defense table, calling me a liar and saying I was making it all up. The judge warned her twice and then had the bailiffs remove her again when she wouldn't stop. I had to continue testifying while they dragged her out screaming that I was an ungrateful son. The prosecutor showed me copies of the credit cards she'd opened in my name and asked me to identify them. I explained how I'd found out about them when I tried to buy my first car and got denied for bad credit. He showed the jury my credit report with all the late payments and collections from cards I never knew existed. After lunch, Rachel took the stand and broke down crying within 5 minutes. She told them about the college fund our dad had left for both of us and how she'd found out it was gone when she tried to pay for her last year of nursing school. She had to drop out with 1 semester left because my mom had drained the entire account. Rachel showed them the bank statements where my mom had forged her signature to withdraw the money. She testified that my mom told her the money was for Lily's emergency surgery that never actually happened. The forensic accountant came next with a PowerPoint presentation that made everyone in the jury gasp. He'd found 23 different credit accounts my mom had opened using me, Rachel, and even our dead grandma's information. The total fraud amount was over $300,000 across 15 years. He showed a chart of how she'd max out one card, open another to pay the minimum on the first, then repeat the cycle. Some of the accounts were opened when I was only 14 years old. On day 3, Gloria took the stand with a box of old documents she'd been keeping for 20 years. She testified about finding forged checks from their mother's account right after she died. Gloria had photocopies of jewelry store receipts showing my mom had sold their mother's wedding ring and diamond necklace. She told the jury about confronting my mom back then and my mom crying and promising to pay it back. Gloria pulled out a handwritten IOU my mom had signed for $8,000 that was never repaid. During a recess, I went outside for air and found Lily sitting on a bench crying. She'd been watching the whole trial from the back row without me noticing. She stood up when she saw me and said she finally understood everything. She apologized for all the years she'd taken advantage of the situation and for not seeing what was really happening. She said she felt sick knowing her whole life had been paid for with stolen money. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and went back inside. Against her lawyer's advice, my mom demanded to take the stand on the last day. She got up there and immediately started rambling about how she was being persecuted for loving her family too much. She claimed I'd orchestrated the whole thing because I was jealous of Lily getting attention. She contradicted herself every few minutes, first saying she never took any money, then saying she borrowed it but paid it back, then saying she deserved it for raising us alone. The prosecutor barely had to cross-examine her because she was destroying her own case. She accused Thomas of lying, the bank of making mistakes, and even suggested Rachel had stolen the college money herself. When the prosecutor asked about the credit cards in my name, she said I must have opened them and forgotten. The jury was looking at her like she'd lost her mind completely. In closing arguments, the prosecutor laid out 20 years of systematic theft and fraud with a timeline on a huge board. He showed how she'd started with her mother's money, moved to her children's inheritance, then graduated to identity theft. The defense attorney, who'd been appointed by the court when my mom's paid lawyer quit, focused on mental illness. He argued she had a compulsive disorder and needed treatment, not prison, but even he looked like he didn't believe it. The jury went to deliberate and came back in less than 2 hours with guilty verdicts on all counts. The judge thanked the jury for their service and dismissed them while the bailiff moved toward my mom with handcuffs. She started screaming that we'd betrayed her, that we were ungrateful children who'd ruined her life, her voice getting higher and more desperate as they pulled her arms behind her back. Rachel grabbed my hand and squeezed it hard. I felt nothing watching them take her away, just this weird empty feeling in my chest like someone had scooped out everything inside. David drove me home afterward and I went straight to my dad's old workshop in the garage, sitting on his workbench where he used to teach me how to fix things. I sat there for hours just looking at his tools hanging on the pegboard, finally letting myself cry for the mom I wished I had instead of the one I got. 6 weeks later we were back in court for sentencing. The judge gave her 5 years with possible parole in 3, plus she had to pay back everything she stole. He said he considered her mental health issues but noted she showed no remorse for what she'd done to her own children. My mom just stared at me the whole time like she was trying to burn holes through my head with her eyes. After that I started going to therapy twice a week, trying to work through all the damage she'd done over the years. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, and Rachel and David started coming over for dinner every Sunday. Other relatives who'd stayed away during all the drama started showing up too, and pretty soon the house became this gathering place for the family members who actually cared about each other. About 2 months after the trial, Lily called me out of nowhere asking if she could come get her stuff from the house. I said yes and she showed up the next Saturday with Frank driving a rental truck. She looked different, wearing jeans and a regular t-shirt instead of her usual designer clothes, her hair in a simple ponytail. We didn't say much while loading boxes, but she mentioned she was working at Target now and going to therapy with Frank. It was awkward but not hostile, and when she left she actually said, "Thanks for letting her get her things." A few weeks later I got a letter from my mom in prison. My therapist and I read it together in her office, and it was exactly what I expected. 3 pages of blame and manipulation about how I destroyed the family and how she'd done everything for me. My therapist asked if I wanted to respond and I said no, finally understanding that I couldn't save someone who didn't want to be saved. The prison started sending small restitution payments from my mom's work program, like $20 here and $30 there. I opened a savings account and put every payment in there, planning to use it for education funds for any kids in the family who might need help down the road. Rachel graduated with her advanced nursing degree that spring, and I gave a speech at her graduation party about how she'd shown me what real family means, how you choose the people who lift you up instead of tear you down. She cried and hugged me so hard I couldn't breathe. 6 months after the trial, I decided to host Thanksgiving at the house for the first time. Gloria came early to help cook. Rachel brought 3 different pies. David showed up with his girlfriend, and a bunch of cousins I hadn't seen in years came too. We were halfway through dinner, everyone laughing and passing dishes around, when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Lily and Frank standing on the porch. porch, Lily holding a store-bought pie and looking nervous. Is there room for 2 more? She asked quietly. I stood there frozen for a second, looking at them both standing on my porch like they didn't belong there anymore. Everyone in the dining room had gone quiet behind me. I could feel Rachel watching from the kitchen doorway and David had stopped mid-laugh at whatever joke someone had been telling. My hand stayed on the door handle while my brain tried to process seeing them here after everything that had happened. Frank looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot, but Lily just stood there holding that cheap pie from the grocery store down the street. I stepped back and opened the door wider, then walked to the dining room and grabbed 2 extra plates from the china cabinet. The scraping sound of chairs moving filled the room as everyone made space at the table. Lily sat down and put the pie on the counter, then looked at me and said, "Thanks," adding that she knew she didn't deserve this. Frank squeezed her shoulder and we all went back to eating. But now there were these careful attempts at normal conversation. People asking Lily about her job at the department store and Frank about his new position at the bank. After everyone finished eating and the dishes were stacked in the kitchen, I showed Lily the workshop in the basement where I'd been fixing up all of Grandpa's old tools. She pulled out her phone and showed me pictures I'd never seen before. Photos of Grandpa with both of us as kids that Mom had hidden away in boxes somewhere. There was one of him teaching us both how to use a hand saw when we were maybe 8 and 5 years old. The guests started leaving around 9, hugging me and telling me how proud they were of everything I'd done with the house. David stayed behind to help clean up and we stood in the kitchen washing dishes side by side like we'd done 100 times before. He dried a plate and set it down, then turned to me and we just looked at each other for a moment before he leaned in and kissed me right there in the kitchen where so much drama had played out over the years. I pulled back and smiled, realizing I was finally ready to move forward with someone who'd been there through everything. Over the next few weeks I made the decision to keep the house but change what it meant. I cleaned out the basement apartment and put up ads at the local college for students who needed cheap housing. I set the rent at half the market rate because I remembered what it was like to struggle with loans and work while trying to study. The first tenant was a kid named Miguel studying engineering who reminded me of myself at that age. About a year after the trial ended, I drove out to the women's correctional facility where Mom was serving her sentence. She looked smaller in the visiting room, wearing the standard gray jumpsuit and her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She told me about the therapy sessions and addiction counseling she'd started attending. She still made excuses and blamed other people for most of what happened, but there were these small moments where she'd admit she'd made mistakes. I told her I'd be there if she ever really wanted to change, not just pretend to change for the parole board. The next family gathering happened 6 months later at Gloria's house and for the first time in years there was no drama or fights or anyone storming out. People told stories about my dad that I'd never heard before because Mom had always controlled the narrative at family events. I learned he'd helped pay for Gloria's nursing degree and had taught most of my cousins how to drive. I found out he'd wanted to be a teacher before he met Mom and she convinced him accounting would pay better. Around that same time, Lily sent me a card in the mail with a photocopy of her first assistant manager paycheck stub from the department store. She wrote that she was proud of earning something real for the first time in her life and thanked me for showing her what actual work looked like. We weren't close and probably never would be, but there was this mutual respect now that hadn't existed before. David moved in with me the following spring and we turned the house into a real home together. Rachel started coming over every Thursday for dinner and we'd cook together in the kitchen while David set the table. The house that used to echo with arguments and accusations now had laughter and music and the smell of good food cooking. I took the money from the restitution payments and my savings and worked with Thomas to set up a family trust fund with strict rules about how the money could be used. We made sure no one could manipulate or steal from it the way Mom had done, with multiple signatures required for any withdrawals and regular audits by an outside firm. The money would be there for education and emergencies for future generations, protected by legal safeguards Thomas spent weeks perfecting. 2 years after everything ended, I stood in my father's workshop teaching my cousin's 10-year-old son how to use the restored hand plane that had belonged to my grandfather. The kid was focused and careful, running the tool along the piece of pine just like I showed him. The workshop smelled like sawdust and lemon oil from the clean tools hanging on their pegboard. Other kids from the family started showing up on weekends to learn woodworking and I realized this was what my father had always wanted the house to be. Not a source of conflict or manipulation or pain, but a place where family could come together and learn and grow. The house echoed with the sound of hammering and sawing and kids laughing when they made mistakes, and I knew I'd finally honored what my dad had tried to build before Mom twisted it all into something else. I'd kept the house but transformed what it meant, protected the family resources while using them to help others, and broke the cycle of manipulation and favoritism that had poisoned everything for so long. Standing there watching my young cousin concentrate on getting the wood perfectly smooth, I understood that my father's real legacy wasn't the property or the money but the strength to protect what matters while still keeping your heart open to the people who hurt you, even when they don't deserve it.